emerges online, claiming to show Ukrainian forces shooting and beating Russian prisoners of war. That as fighting between Russian and Ukrainian forces is still ongoing in the southern city of Mariupol, we report from the ground.
Nationalist battalions like Azov continue fighting. They're hiding in residential buildings. They have taken over Azov-style metallurgy plant and are using civilians as human shields.
I see people on TV talking about modernity, about morality, and they say that Putin is a criminal. If Putin is a criminal, then we are 10 times worse.
An Italian journalist who's reporting on the ground from the Donbass accuses Western media of distorting its coverage of Ukraine. But that's as foreign journalists are increasingly heading to the region to report on the untold story of eastern Ukraine. Also ahead.
The humanitarian suffering that we have seen in Ukraine, and everyone is talking about it right now. It has been the suffering of a lot of countries in this region.
Middle East countries criticise the West for turning a blind eye to the suffering of people from the region, claiming it's paying a disproportionate amount of attention to the war in Ukraine. It's Monday morning here in Moscow. My name's Peter Scott and welcome to 30 minutes of news and views here on RT International, coming to you live from the Russian capital. But first, to the major updates of the Ukrainian conflict. The Russian Ministry of Defense says its offensive in Ukraine is going to plan, with the main tasks of the first phase successfully accomplished. Ukraine, on the other hand, says it stalled the Russian advance, inflicted heavy losses and forced some units into retreat. It comes as both sides have agreed a new round of talks will take place on Tuesday. President Zelensky says territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine will remain the country's priority during the negotiations, adding Kyiv doesn't want to drag out the talks with Russia. Let's now break down what's happening on the ground. This is some of the latest footage from the centre of Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, where, according to local authorities, 2 districts were shelled by the Russian military overnight. Russia's defence ministry is yet to comment on the claim. Thousands of Kharkiv residents have sought shelter in metro stations. The Donetsk People's Republic Information Ministry has released video allegedly showing Ukrainian forces shooting and beating Russian prisoners of war. The head of Russia's investigative committee has ordered an investigation into the incident. Now, we won't show you the disturbing video as it portrays soldiers bound, lying on the ground with multiple bullet wounds to their legs, while others have broken bones. The as yet unverified footage has caused anger on social media, and Ukrainian officials, meanwhile, gave this comment.
I remind everyone that abusing prisoners of war is a war crime that does not carry amnesty under international law and does not have a statute of limitations. We are a European army of a European country. We treat prisoners according to the Geneva Convention, no matter what your personal emotional motives may be.
Ukrainian soldiers shoot 2 Russian prisoners of war in the legs and film themselves doing it. Video below shows about 6 other Russian soldiers with similar wounds. Without question, it's a war crime, and there is nothing to justify it.
If war crimes don't disturb you because they're against Russians, think about how the soldiers who are willing to shoot unarmed prisoners might be willing to treat Ukrainian civilians.
Meanwhile, this video from the southern city of Mariupol shows many of the residential buildings shattered or completely destroyed. Many have been heavily damaged by bombs, shelling and gunfire. The dire humanitarian situation pushed many locals to stay in their basements for days without food and electricity. And as fighting for the city continues, RT's Roman Kosarev reports from the ground.
The city of Mariupol is being liberated by Donetsk People's Republic forces, by Russia's National Guard, by Marines. So many kinds of troops are present here, and they're all at the moment fighting against nationalist Azov battalions who still are hiding within civilian infrastructure and in other places.
Snipers are mostly sitting by crossroads, high-rise buildings. Militants often change into civilian clothes. We catch them.
Haidar has brought many troubles to the people. They fired at this building and said we'd done this when we were not even in the city yet. Local residents are coming to us saying there are tripwires in their houses and they're afraid to walk. We've been removing them.
Civilians mostly welcome us, thank us for coming and ask why haven't we come before. We help each other.
Nationalist battalions like Azov continue fighting. They're hiding in residential buildings. They have taken over Azov-style metallurgy plant and are using civilians as human shields, according to local residents.
To be honest, it was such a horrific nightmare. The Ukrainian tank was standing next to exit from our shelter. Every time we've been trying to get out, it drove closer and fired at us. There are still dead bodies left. No one removes them. We're so terrified.
Humanitarian catastrophe here is everywhere. People live in basements without food, water or electricity. There are temporary centers that were set up here for people to receive food and water. And of course, I spoke to some of the people that decided to stay in Mariupol during these hard times.
We all sleep in such a cold, wet basement. We're all coughing, we're all sick, but we all hope for the better.
The house has burned. There's nowhere to go. We live in a basement. The authorities left us to the mercy of fate. There's no food, no water, no electricity, no gas. You know, it's a ghost city and we're all ghosts here.
Meanwhile, the Russian Defense Ministry has given an assessment of the first phase of the offensive in Ukraine, claiming its main tasks have been completed. Here's a map with some of the latest data. According to the Defense Ministry, things have been progressing in accordance with the plan. Almost the entire area of the Lugansk Republic and more than half of the Donetsk Republic are under Russian control. Russian troops have apparently surrounded Kyiv, Kharkiv, Chernigov, Sumy and Nikolaev, and most of the Zaporozhye region is now under Russian control. However, Ukrainian authorities say they've successfully halted the Russian advance, inflicted heavy losses, and pushed troops back in some areas. An Italian journalist who's reporting from the ground in the Donbass has recorded a video message to his country's president, and in it he accuses Western media of distorting its coverage of the conflict, in particular when it comes to the alleged role of extremists in Ukrainian battalions.
I stop random people and interview them. They all tell me they were locked in their basement and couldn't get out. Many say they shot at them to keep them from leaving. By they mean the neo-Nazi battalions. And then I see on the Washington Post that these militants read works by Kant. I went to their former bases where there are Nazi symbols. I saw books about SS guards, about Mussolini. Then we are told about the nationalist organisations in Italy, while here we see the real Nazis holding the whole state hostage. I see people on TV talking about modernity, about morality, and they say that Putin is a criminal. If Putin is a criminal, then we are 10 times worse. These days we are marking the anniversary of the destruction of Belgrade. Tons of bombs were thrown at the city based on fake news. You can also remember Iraq, Syria, Libya, Afghanistan. But if you remind them of all this, they will not want to hear about it.
Well, that Italian reporter is just one of an increasing number of foreign journalists who visited eastern Ukraine. One group went to a village in the Lugansk Republic, which was taken under the control of People's Forces around a month ago. An independent reporter who visited the Donbass spoke of his experience.
I feel surprised. This is a place that endured fighting, and you normally expect people to be outraged about this. But it's vice versa here. People are welcoming the Russian troops. They are glad they have come. Everyone is talking about the horrors of the last 8 years.